My name is Arthur Jenkins. I'm 62 years old, or rather, I was 62 when this all went down, a couple of years ago. For 40 years, I worked as a senior financial analyst for a major investment firm in New York City. My life was meticulously planned, every detail considered, every contingency accounted for. I was the architect of my own stability, a man who believed in prudence, foresight, and the sanctity of financial security. I lived in a quiet, comfortable brownstone in Brooklyn, a place I'd owned outright for decades. My routine was predictable, almost ritualistic: black coffee and the Wall Street Journal at 6 a.m., a brisk walk through Prospect Park, then off to work where I spent my days dissecting markets and advising clients on how to safeguard their futures. I was good at it, very good. My clients trusted me implicitly, and my colleagues respected my meticulous nature and unwavering ethical compass. My wife, Sarah, passed away 15 years ago after a long battle with cancer. We never had children, and her loss left a void that I filled with my work, my community involvement, and a quiet, contented solitude. I wasn't lonely, not exactly. I had friends, a few close ones from work, and a robust social circle through my volunteer efforts at a local animal shelter. I'd always had a soft spot for animals, particularly strays, and dedicated a significant portion of my free time and a substantial sum of my income to their welfare. My life, as I saw it, was perfect, peaceful, structured, and profoundly secure. I had a robust retirement fund, a substantial emergency fund, liquid assets specifically designated for unforeseen circumstances, and a $500,000 annuity, set to mature in a few years, which I intended to leave to the animal shelter, my legacy for the voiceless creatures I cared so much about. I had no grand ambitions for my later years beyond continuing my volunteer work, tending my small garden, and occasionally traveling to places Sarah and I had dreamed of seeing together. I was, in essence, a man who had built his own fortress of contentment, brick by careful brick. My sister, Clara, was my only living relative. She lived a few states away, in Ohio, with her son, Max. Max was my nephew, Clara's only child, and for most of his life, he was a pleasant, if somewhat unremarkable, young man. He was in his late 20s, perpetually figuring things out, as Clara often put it. This usually meant he was between jobs, dabbling in various schemes that never quite panned out, and living off his mother's dwindling resources. I tried to be supportive, offering financial advice, even helping him with a down payment for a modest apartment a few years back, which he quickly lost due to missed payments. I'd always felt a familial obligation towards Max, a sense of responsibility passed down from Clara, who always emphasized the importance of family. She'd call me every few weeks, detailing Max's latest entrepreneurial venture, a cryptocurrency startup, an online gaming platform, a revolutionary social media app. Each one sounded more dubious than the last, and my financial analyst's radar would immediately start flashing red. I'd offer gentle warnings, advice to tread carefully, but Clara, ever the doting mother, would brush them aside, convinced that Max was just on the cusp of his big break. About a year before everything imploded, Max started calling me directly. At first, it was innocent enough. He'd ask for advice on investment strategies, which I was happy to provide, carefully explaining the risks and rewards. Then, the requests for loans began. Small sums at first, a few $100s for critical software for his latest project, $1,000 for marketing materials. I'd always believed in helping family, but I also believed in tough love and accountability. I'd give him the money, but I'd always attach conditions, a repayment plan, a detailed explanation of how the funds would be used, a promise to show me progress reports. He'd agree to everything, of course, and then the repayment dates would come and go, the progress reports would never materialize, and he'd call again with another urgent request. I noticed a subtle shift in his demeanor during these calls. He became more insistent, less apologetic. There was an undercurrent of entitlement, a subtle pressure that made me uncomfortable. Clara, meanwhile, seemed to be growing increasingly exasperated with him, her calls filled with sighs and lamentations about his financial irresponsibility. "Arthur," she'd say, "I just don't know what to do with him anymore. He's bleeding me dry." I felt for her, truly. She was a good woman, just a little too soft when it came to her son. One particular incident stands out in my memory. It was about 6 months before the discovery. Max called, desperate. He claimed he had a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to invest in a pre-IPO tech company, that was guaranteed to make millions. He needed $10,000, immediately, to secure his stake. He swore on his mother's life that it was legitimate, that he'd double my money within a month. I, ever the cautious investor, asked for documentation, for the company's prospectus, for anything that would validate his claims. He got defensive, then angry. "Uncle Arthur," he snapped, "don't you trust me? This is family." I held firm, explaining that trust in financial matters needed to be backed by verifiable information. He eventually backed down, but the conversation left a bitter taste. It was the first time I truly saw a glimpse of something darker in Max, a desperate avarice that bordered on manipulation. I didn't give him the $10,000. He didn't call for a few weeks after that, and I admit, I enjoyed the peace. My emergency fund was something I guarded fiercely. It was held in a separate, highly liquid account, accessible only by me, with a direct debit card for immediate use in genuine emergencies. It was my ultimate safety net, the money that would see me through any unforeseen crisis, medical or otherwise. I had built it up over decades, a testament to my financial discipline, and it was a source of profound comfort. I had no intention of ever touching it unless absolutely necessary. Little did I know, the lines of my meticulously planned life were already being blurred, subtly, insidiously, by someone I thought I could trust. The subtle hints of Max's desperation, his growing entitlement, and Clara's weary resignation were all leading to an unavoidable precipice. I just couldn't see it yet. The perfect life I had so carefully constructed was about to come crashing down, and the architect of its destruction would be my own flesh and blood. The day I discovered the betrayal is etched into my memory with painful clarity. It was a Tuesday, late October, a crisp, bright autumn morning. I had just returned from my usual walk in Prospect Park, a steaming mug of coffee in hand, ready to settle into my morning routine of reading the financial news. I remember the date precisely, October 24th. I had recently started consolidating some of my older online accounts, a habit of mine to ensure maximum security. My emergency fund account, while rarely accessed, was one of the ones I decided to review. I logged in, expecting to see the familiar healthy balance, exactly as I had left it. What I saw instead made my blood run cold. The balance was drastically reduced. Not by a few thousand, not even by 10,000. It was decimated. The numbers flashed on the screen, a horrifying testament to systematic, calculated theft. My emergency fund, meticulously built over 40 years, was almost entirely gone. It had held a substantial sum, over $120,000, money I had set aside for any unthinkable medical crisis, any major home repair, anything that life might throw at me. Now, it was barely over $5,000. My heart began to pound in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. My hands started to tremble, nearly spilling my coffee. This couldn't be right. There had to be a mistake, a glitch in the system. I refreshed the page, then logged out and back in again, hoping it was some cruel digital illusion. But the numbers remained, stark and unforgiving. Then, I started examining the transaction history. Page after page of debits, all within the last 6 months. They weren't small, either. Many were for several $1,000s, some for even larger sums, ranging from $3,000 to $15,000. The descriptions were vague: online purchase, transfer, ATM withdrawal. But then, a pattern began to emerge. Many of the transactions were from specific vendors. High-end electronics stores. Luxury watch retailers. Online casinos. And then, the clincher, several large transfers to a single name. Max Thompson. My nephew's full name. The address associated with the transfers was his Ohio address. A cold, sickening dread washed over me, replacing the initial shock with a burning indignation. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a glitch. It was Max. He had somehow gotten access to my emergency fund debit card, or perhaps the account information itself, and had been systematically siphoning off my money for months. The subtle hints, the growing entitlement, the insistent loan requests, it all clicked into place with a horrifying certainty. He hadn't just been asking for money, he had been stealing it. I immediately called my bank, my voice tight with barely suppressed rage. The fraud department was helpful, but the news was grim. The transactions had all been made with a valid card, or through legitimate online transfers initiated from an IP address consistent with Max's location. It was technically authorized by the card's usage, even if I hadn't authorized it. They couldn't guarantee recovery, especially after so much time had passed. They initiated a fraud investigation, of course, but the process would be long and arduous, with no certain outcome. My mind raced, reeling from the sheer audacity of it. My own nephew. The boy I had helped, the family I had supported, had violated my trust in the most egregious way possible. He hadn't just taken money, he had stolen my peace of mind, my sense of security, the very foundation of my meticulously built life. I tried calling Max. No answer. I called Clara. She sounded distracted, then annoyed when I pressed her about Max's whereabouts and recent activities. "He's just busy, Arthur," she stammered. "He's got a lot on his plate." I didn't tell her what I had discovered. Not yet. I needed to gather my thoughts, to understand the full scope of the damage. That night, I barely slept. The anger simmered beneath the surface, a hot, throbbing ache in my chest. The betrayal felt like a physical wound. I had always prided myself on my financial acumen, my ability to foresee and mitigate risks. Yet, I had been blindsided, not by some faceless market force, but by someone I loved. The irony was not lost on me. I, the financial analyst who preached prudence and security, had been fleeced by his own nephew. The man who advised others on safeguarding their futures had failed to safeguard his own. The humiliation was almost as potent as the anger. This wasn't just about the money, it was about the desecration of trust, the shattering of a familial bond. Max had not just taken my emergency fund, he had taken a piece of my soul. And in that moment, as the first rays of dawn crept through my window, illuminating the stark reality of my depleted account, a cold, hard resolve began to form within me. Max had made his move. Now, it was my turn. The initial shock and white-hot anger eventually cooled, giving way to something far more dangerous, a meticulous, ice-cold fury. Max had taken my financial security, yes, but he had also stolen something far more precious, my peace. And for that, he would pay. This wouldn't be about just getting my money back, though that was a part of it. This would be about consequences, about teaching a devastating lesson in a language he understood, loss. My background as a senior financial analyst, a man who dealt in numbers, strategies, and the delicate dance of cause and effect, became my greatest weapon. For decades, I had advised clients on risk management, asset protection, and strategic investments. Now, I would apply those same principles to crafting a revenge so precise, so devastating, that Max would never forget it. The first step was absolute discretion. I told no one. Not my friends, not Clara, and certainly not the police yet. I needed to understand every facet of Max's life, his vulnerabilities, his aspirations. I began by discreetly investigating his current financial situation. It wasn't hard. Max, for all his grandiose schemes, was incredibly sloppy online. I found his LinkedIn profile, which was sparse but led me to a few of his online ventures, mostly defunct websites for cryptocurrency scams and dubious multi-level marketing schemes. I also found his public social media profiles, where he bragged about his successes, posting photos of himself with expensive watches, some of which looked suspiciously like purchases from my emergency fund's transaction history, and flashy cars he clearly couldn't afford. I also spent hours poring over the transaction history of my emergency fund. I painstakingly cross-referenced every suspicious debit with online records, store locations, and even public social media posts. The trail led to luxury goods, high-stakes online gambling sites, and lavish trips, to Miami, to Las Vegas, all within the last 6 months. He had been living high on my dime, flaunting it for the world to see, while I remained oblivious. The proof was irrefutable, ironclad. My primary leverage, the $500,000 annuity, became the focal point of my plan. It was set to mature in about 2 years. I had originally intended to leave it to the local animal shelter I volunteered at, a place called Pause and Hope. Max knew about this. I had mentioned it to him years ago, in a hopeful conversation about leaving a positive legacy. He had scoffed at the idea then, dismissing it as wasting money on cats and dogs. His disdain for the shelter, and indeed for any cause that didn't directly benefit him, was palpable. This was a crucial piece of the puzzle. My initial thought was to simply cut him out of my will entirely, but that felt too passive, too slow. It wouldn't deliver the immediate, devastating blow I craved. I wanted him to feel the loss, to understand the direct consequence of his actions. I needed to make him anticipate a gain, then snatch it away in the most public and humiliating way possible. I began to subtly manipulate conversations with Clara. I'd bring up my finances, my plans for the annuity, subtly mentioning that it was growing nicely and would be a significant sum. I'd hint, casually, that as my only living relative, Max might be a potential beneficiary if my plans changed. I knew Clara would relay this information directly to Max, feeding his avarice and creating a false sense of expectation. I wanted him to believe that if he just played his cards right, if he just endured me for a few more years, a substantial windfall was waiting for him. Meanwhile, I quietly contacted a lawyer specializing in estate planning and elder abuse. I explained the situation, providing all the evidence I had meticulously gathered. He advised me on the legalities of modifying my annuity and my will. The annuity, while intended for the shelter, was still under my control. I could transfer ownership to Pause and Hope immediately, effectively removing it from my estate and making it unreachable by any future claims from Max. The transfer would be irrevocable. The lawyer also advised me on gathering more formal evidence for a potential criminal complaint against Max, should I choose to pursue it. I started compiling everything: bank statements, transaction logs, screenshots of Max's social media boasting, even records of my phone calls with him where he'd explicitly denied his financial struggles. The most crucial part of my plan, however, involved public humiliation. Max thrived on an image of success, however false. He loved to project an image of wealth and savvy to his online followers and, more importantly, to his social circle in Ohio. Taking away his expected inheritance wasn't enough. I needed to expose him, to strip him of his carefully constructed facade. I started volunteering more frequently at Pause and Hope, becoming an even more visible and vocal advocate for their work. I made a point of discussing the shelter's financial struggles and their tireless efforts to save animals. I wanted to create a stark contrast: my dedication to a selfless cause versus Max's self-serving greed. My plan solidified. I would make the irrevocable transfer of the annuity to Pause and Hope. But I wouldn't do it silently. I would make it a public event, a celebration of generosity, timed to coincide with a moment where Max's expectations of inheritance were at their peak. I would leverage the shelter's local media contacts. I knew the shelter would jump at the opportunity for positive publicity and a major donation. The local newspaper, the TV station, they loved feel-good stories about community benefactors. The tools of my revenge were my financial knowledge, my patience, my network, and my absolute control over my assets. Max had used my money to build a fantasy. I would use my money, and his greed, to dismantle his reality. I spent weeks, sometimes sleepless nights, refining every detail, anticipating every possible reaction from Max. I envisioned the look on his face when he realized what I had done, the public shame, the shattering of his carefully cultivated image. And for the first time since I discovered the betrayal, I felt a profound sense of calm, a cold satisfaction. The game was on. The day arrived, crisp and bright, much like the day I discovered Max's betrayal, but this time, the air crackled with a different kind of energy, one of impending reckoning. It was 3 months after I finalized my plan. I had quietly, meticulously set everything in motion. The public announcement of my significant donation to Pause and Hope was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon. The local newspaper had sent a reporter and a photographer. A small crew from the local TV station was also present, having been tipped off by the shelter about a generous local benefactor. I had orchestrated a conversation with Clara just the week before, subtly hinting that I was reevaluating my estate plans and considering Max more seriously given his recent efforts, a complete fabrication, of course. I knew she would relay this to him, planting the seed of expectation, making him believe his efforts at subtle manipulation had finally paid off. I wanted him to feel the tantalizing proximity of a windfall, only to have it snatched away. The event was held at Pause and Hope, in their newly renovated adoption center, a project my initial smaller donations had helped kickstart. There were volunteers, community members, and several adorable cats and dogs milling around. I stood at a podium, a large, ceremonial check for $500,000, prominently displayed beside me, representing the annuities transfer. Not just a cash donation. It was all meticulously planned for maximum impact. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with a strange mix of anticipation and righteous anger. I scanned the small crowd. And then I saw him. Max. He stood near the back, looking slightly uncomfortable in a cheap suit, his eyes darting around, probably calculating how much this public spectacle was costing me. He must have driven up from Ohio, lured by Clara's excited, vague hints about a special announcement involving my finances. He probably thought I was going to announce him as the primary beneficiary of my will, or perhaps even give him a substantial advance. I began my speech, my voice clear and steady. Good afternoon, everyone. It is with immense pleasure and profound gratitude that I stand before you today. For many years, Pause and Hope has been a beacon of hope for countless animals in need. I spoke about the shelter's mission, the tireless work of the volunteers, and my personal connection to their cause. I spoke about Sarah, and how her love for animals had inspired my own dedication. The reporter was scribbling notes, the TV camera panned across the enthusiastic faces in the crowd. I could see Max shifting uncomfortably, probably bored by the sentimentality, eager for the real announcement. He probably thought I was just building up to his big moment. Then, I paused, taking a deliberate breath. For decades, I continued, my gaze sweeping across the audience, momentarily landing on Max, whose eyes now met mine, a flicker of impatience in their depths. I have worked diligently to build a secure future. Part of that security came in the form of an annuity, a substantial sum I had earmarked for my later years, and eventually, for a meaningful legacy. I paused again, letting the words hang in the air. Max leaned forward slightly, a predatory gleam in his eyes. He thought he knew where this was going. He thought this was his moment. However, I said, my voice hardening imperceptibly, recent events have opened my eyes. They have shown me where true value lies, and where my resources can make the most profound difference. They have also shown me the stark reality of greed, betrayal, and the insidious nature of those who would exploit trust for personal gain. A ripple went through the crowd. Max's confident smirk faltered. His brow furrowed slightly. My emergency fund, I continued, raising my voice slightly, a fund I meticulously built over 40 years, was recently emptied. Systematically, deliberately, and without my knowledge or consent, by someone I considered family. A collective gasp went through the audience. The reporter's pen stopped. The TV camera zoomed in on my face. Max, at the back, had gone pale. His mouth was slightly agape. I spent weeks investigating, I went on, my voice now laced with an icy contempt. I found detailed evidence, thousands of dollars spent on luxury items, on gambling, on lavish trips, all charged to my account. And every single transaction led back to one person. My nephew, Max Thompson. Chaos erupted. A murmur of outrage swept through the crowd. Flashbulbs from the newspaper photographer started popping. The TV camera swung to Max, who stood frozen, his face a mask of shock and utter horror. He was caught. Publicly. Irrevocably. Max Thompson, I declared, pointing a finger directly at him, you stole from me. You violated my trust. You squandered my emergency fund, money I had set aside for genuine need, for your own selfish, fleeting pleasures. I paused again, letting the words hang in the air. Max leaned forward slightly, a predatory gleam in his eyes. He thought he knew where this was going. He thought this was his moment. However, I said, my voice hardening imperceptibly, recent events have opened my eyes. They have shown me where true value lies, and where my resources can make the most profound difference. They have also shown me the stark reality of greed, betrayal, and the insidious nature of those who would exploit trust for personal gain. A ripple went through the crowd. Max's confident smirk faltered. His brow furrowed slightly. My emergency fund, I continued, raising my voice slightly, a fund I meticulously built over 40 years, was recently emptied. Systematically, deliberately, and without my knowledge or consent, by someone I considered family. A collective gasp went through the audience. The reporter's pen stopped. The TV camera zoomed in on my face. Max, at the back, had gone pale. His mouth was slightly agape. I spent weeks investigating, I went on, my voice now laced with an icy contempt. I found detailed evidence, thousands of dollars spent on luxury items, on gambling, on lavish trips, all charged to my account. And every single transaction led back to one person. My nephew, Max Thompson. Chaos erupted. A murmur of outrage swept through the crowd. Flashbulbs from the newspaper photographer started popping. The TV camera swung to Max, who stood frozen, his face a mask of shock and utter horror. He was caught. Publicly. Irrevocably. Max Thompson, I declared, pointing a finger directly at him, you stole from me. You violated my trust. You squandered my emergency fund, money I had set aside for genuine need, for your own selfish, fleeting pleasures. Max, finally jolting out of his stupor, began to back away, muttering, no, no, Uncle Arthur, you're mistaken. But his voice was weak, trembling. And so, I concluded, my voice ringing with finality, while I may not be able to fully recover what you stole from my emergency fund through the courts, I can ensure that you will never profit from my future. This annuity, I gestured to the oversized check, this $500,000, was once destined to potentially benefit my family. But after your actions, I have irrevocably transferred it to pause and hope. Every single cent will go to save animals, a cause you openly despise. You will receive nothing. Not a single penny from me, ever again. With a flourish, I turned and, with the help of the shelter director, presented the giant check to a beaming volunteer, as the cameras flashed and the audience erupted in a mix of cheers and stunned silence. Max, meanwhile, was frantically pushing his way through the crowd, desperate to escape the glare of the cameras and the condemning stares. His escape was clumsy, tripping over a dog bed, nearly knocking over a display of adoption flyers. He stumbled out of the shelter doors and disappeared, leaving behind a wake of stunned silence and palpable disgust. The press, sensing the drama, immediately swarmed me, questions flying. I calmly reiterated the facts, showing them some of the documented evidence I had brought with me, redacted bank statements, screenshots of Max's social media. The story was no longer just about a generous donation, it was about betrayal and a meticulously executed revenge. My revenge was complete. Max, who craved money and status above all else, had just witnessed $500,000, money he had likely been fantasizing about inheriting, be irrevocably diverted to a charity he loathed, all while being publicly exposed as a thief and a betrayer. The chaos was magnificent. The reactions were everything I had planned for. It was a climax worthy of a Shakespearean tragedy, and Max Thompson was the humiliated protagonist. The fallout was swift, brutal, and profoundly satisfying. The local news channels picked up the story immediately. My interview, juxtaposed with snippets of Max's panicked escape, went viral in the regional news circuits. The headline, Elderly Man Donates $500,000 Annuity to Animal Shelter After Nephew Empties Emergency Fund, spread like wildfire. The consequences for Max were immediate and devastating. His carefully constructed online persona as a savvy, up-and-coming entrepreneur shattered. The public humiliation was absolute. His social media was flooded with condemning comments, calling him a thief and a leech. Any business partners he might have had quickly distanced themselves. He lost what little credibility he had, and any hope of future ventures, however dubious, evaporated overnight. His friends, many of whom he had undoubtedly tried to impress with his fabricated wealth, turned their backs on him. The shame followed him everywhere. Clara, my sister, was initially furious with me. She called, screaming, accusing me of ruining her son's life, of airing our family laundry in public. But when I calmly presented her with the overwhelming evidence, the bank statements, the transaction logs, the proof of Max's lavish spending on my dime, her anger slowly turned to despair, then to a profound, heartbroken resignation. She had been in denial for years, but now, faced with undeniable proof and the public outcry, she couldn't ignore the truth any longer. She stopped defending him. Their already strained relationship crumbled under the weight of his actions and the resulting public shame. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she eventually moved to a different town, seeking anonymity and a fresh start, leaving Max to face the music alone. Their bond was severed, a direct consequence of his greed. I did, eventually, press charges against Max for theft and fraud. The evidence was overwhelming, thanks to my meticulous planning. The police investigation was thorough, and with the public attention the story had garnered, they moved quickly. Max was arrested and faced a battery of charges. The legal process was long, but justice, in this case, was undeniable. He was eventually convicted and sentenced to time in prison, not just for stealing from me, but for other instances of financial deception that the police uncovered during their investigation. He squandered his youth and freedom, trading them for a few months of stolen luxury. My own life, ironically, improved dramatically. The initial sting of betrayal faded, replaced by a quiet sense of triumph and empowerment. The animal shelter, Pause and Hope, thrived with the $500,000 annuity. They were able to expand their facilities, hire more staff, and save hundreds, if not thousands, of animals who would have otherwise been euthanized. I became even more involved, now seen as a true benefactor, a pillar of the community. The irony that Max's despicable actions led to such profound good for a cause he despised was a daily source of quiet satisfaction. My emergency fund was eventually partially reimbursed by the bank's fraud department, though not entirely. I lost some money, yes, but I gained so much more. I gained peace. I gained justice. I gained a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper connection to the community and the causes I cared about. The lessons learned were stark. Never again would I allow familial ties to blind me to clear red flags. Trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to repair. And sometimes, the most effective revenge isn't just about getting even, it's about turning a perpetrator's malice into something profoundly good, transforming their destructive intent into a powerful force for positive change. Max thought he had ruined me. Instead, he unwittingly became the catalyst for my greatest act of generosity, and for his own spectacular downfall. My security, once threatened, was now stronger than ever, rebuilt on the bedrock of self-respect and unwavering conviction. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new unreleased stories here every day. Each one more intense than the last. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts about new stories like this one. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.